When my mom kicked me out that night, I remember standing on the porch with my small bag and shaking hands. The rain was cold, and my heart felt even colder. She didn't even look back as she slammed the door. I was only 19, scared, and carrying a baby I hadn't planned, but already loved more than anything. I kept thinking she'd open the door again, that she'd change her mind. But she never did. I walked to the bus stop, soaked to the skin, with only $50 in my pocket. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I had to protect my baby. I found a cheap room in an old building downtown. It smelled like mold, and the window wouldn't close, but it was shelter. I started working at a small diner the next morning, washing dishes and serving coffee. The pay was barely enough for rent and food, but I didn't care. I was alive, and so was the tiny heartbeat growing inside me. There were nights when I cried quietly, afraid of the future. My feet ached, my back hurt, and sometimes I went to bed hungry so I could save enough for baby clothes. No one came to check on me. My mom didn't call. Ryan, the baby's father, stopped answering his phone after I told him I was pregnant. I realized then that I was completely alone. But in that loneliness, something changed inside me. I stopped waiting for people to care. I decided I would make it on my own. When my son Eli was born, everything felt different. He was so small, yet so full of life. Holding him gave me strength I didn't know I had. Every cry reminded me why I had to keep pushing forward. I worked double shifts and slept only a few hours a night. I saved every extra dollar. I didn't buy new clothes or go out. Everything went toward building a better life for him. One night after a long shift, I stopped at a gas station to buy milk. I had $10 left. On a whim, I bought a lottery ticket. I don't even know why. Maybe I just needed to feel a little hope. I folded it and forgot about it for days. When I finally checked the numbers later that week, my hands shook so hard I dropped the ticket. I had actually won $6.8 million. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt unreal. I didn't scream or celebrate. I just sat there holding Eli, whispering, "We did it." I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I paid off my debts, moved to a small house in a quiet neighborhood, and started planning for our future. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. I was no longer the girl my mother threw away. I was a woman building something of her own, and one day she would see it. Growing up, my mother, Deborah, ran our house like a courtroom. Everything had to look perfect. The clothes, the house, even the way I smiled in family photos. She didn't care how I felt, only how others saw us. My father left when I was 10, and after that, she became colder. She used to say, "We don't show weakness in this family." I learned early on that love in our house came with conditions. When I went to college, I thought I'd finally escaped her control. I studied business and worked part-time at a bookstore to pay my bills. That's where I met Ryan. He was charming, funny, and made me feel seen for the first time. We'd sit in the car for hours talking about dreams, his of starting a company, mine of owning a small bakery someday. He said he loved me, and I believed him. When I found out I was pregnant, I was scared but also hopeful. I thought maybe we could build something real together. I told Ryan first. He went silent. "I just need time," he said. Time turned into excuses. Excuses turned into distance. By the time I told my mother, I was already alone. That night still plays in my mind like a bad dream. I sat at the kitchen table, shaking, as I told her the truth. For a moment, she just stared at me. Then her face turned red. "You ruined this family's name," she shouted, her voice echoing through the house. I tried to explain, to tell her I didn't plan this, but she wouldn't listen. She grabbed my suitcase from my room, stuffed my clothes in, and threw them onto the porch. "You made your choice, now live with it." I remember standing outside, the cold air hitting my face, my stomach twisting in fear. The porch light turned off, and just like that, I was no longer her daughter. The sound of that door closing still haunts me. For days, I stayed with a classmate who let me sleep on her couch. I called Ryan again, hoping he'd answer this time. He didn't. A week later, his number was disconnected. I found out from a mutual friend that he'd dropped out and moved away. No call. No message. Just gone. That was when I truly understood what betrayal felt like. Not just being abandoned, but being treated like I never mattered. My heart broke in ways I didn't think it could. But even then, something in me refused to give up. I didn't know what the future looked like, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't let their rejection destroy me. That night, as I packed the few things I had left and looked at my reflection in a cracked mirror, I whispered to myself, "You're on your own now, Lena. But you'll survive." I didn't know it then, but that was the moment I started becoming stronger than they ever imagined. The apartment I found was small, dark, and cold, but it was all I could afford. The basement smelled like damp concrete, and the only window was high on the wall, barely letting in light. I bought a thin mattress from a thrift store and used an old crate as a table. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every morning, I got up before sunrise and walked to the diner where I worked. At first, they only gave me a few hours, but when one of the waitresses quit, I took on her shifts too. I washed dishes, cleaned tables, and served coffee until my feet ached. The customers barely looked at me, but I didn't care. I needed every dollar. I saved every tip in a jar, counting them at night like they were treasures. Some days, I skipped meals just to stretch my money. My belly was growing, and I worried if my baby was getting enough. I didn't have anyone to talk to. My mother hadn't called once. I told myself I didn't need her, but sometimes, when I lay awake at night, I wished she'd just ask if I was okay. She never did. When my due date came, I went to the hospital alone. The nurse asked if someone was coming to stay with me. I just shook my head. The labor was long and painful, and at one point, I thought I couldn't do it anymore. But then I heard a tiny cry, soft and fragile, and everything changed. I looked at his face and felt something I had never felt before: pure love. I named him Eli. Life after that became even harder. I went back to work just 3 weeks after giving birth. I would leave Eli with an older lady from the next building who babysat kids for a few dollars an hour. Every morning, I kissed his forehead and promised him a better life. Every night, when I rocked him to sleep, I whispered, "I'll make sure you never feel the pain I did." There were nights when I sat on the floor, feeding him with tears rolling down my face. I wondered how my own mother could walk away so easily. I couldn't understand how anyone could abandon something so innocent. But each time those thoughts came, I looked at Eli and reminded myself that love wasn't about blood. It was about care. Months turned into years, and slowly, things got a little better. I learned how to manage bills, how to stretch groceries, and how to live on almost nothing. I didn't have fancy things, but I had peace. I had purpose. And though life kept testing me, I never stopped pushing forward. Deep down, I knew something powerful was growing inside me. Not just hope, but strength. And one day, everyone who had turned their back on me would see it. It was late one night, and the rain was coming down hard. I had just finished a long double shift at the diner. My uniform was damp, and my shoes were soaked through. The streets were quiet except for the sound of thunder in the distance. I stopped at a small gas station on my way home to buy milk for Eli. When I opened my wallet, there was only $10 left. I sighed, thinking about how far that money still had to go before payday. As I stood in line, I noticed a rack of lottery tickets near the counter. The cashier, a tired-looking man, said, "You never know, maybe tonight's your lucky night." I almost laughed. Me? Lucky? The thought felt like a joke. But something in me, maybe exhaustion, maybe hope, made me take one. "Why not?" I said, handing over the last few dollars. I folded the ticket, slipped it into my bag, and walked back out into the storm. By the time I got home, Eli was asleep in his crib. I changed out of my wet clothes, warmed some soup, and forgot about the ticket completely. The next few days were busy as usual. Early mornings, long hours, and sleepless nights. The ticket stayed at the bottom of my bag, mixed in with old receipts and loose change. It wasn't until almost a week later that I found it again. I was cleaning out my bag before work and noticed the small slip of paper, slightly crumpled. I smiled to myself and said out loud, "Let's see what dream I didn't win this time." I turned on the old TV in my apartment and checked the numbers one by one. The first number matched. Then the second. By the time I got to the fifth, my hands were shaking so hard I had to sit down. I rechecked the screen again and again, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But it was real. Every number matched. My chest felt tight, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it. I whispered, "No way, this can't be real." I called the number on the ticket to confirm. The woman on the other end asked me to read it again slowly. When she said, "Congratulations, you've won $6.8 million," I just sat there in silence. I didn't scream. I didn't even move. It felt like my whole world had gone still. Eli started to cry in the other room, and that sound pulled me back to reality. I picked him up, holding him close, tears streaming down my face. "We did it, baby," I whispered. "We're finally safe." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying everything. the nights I'd gone hungry, the times I'd almost given up. And now, out of nowhere, life had given me something I never expected, a chance to start over. The next morning felt different. The sun seemed brighter, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of worry pressing on my chest. I still went to work that day, just like always. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I didn't even let it fully sink in. I wanted to move carefully, to think clearly before doing anything. I'd spent years surviving one day at a time, so rushing didn't feel right. Over the next few weeks, I started making quiet changes. The first thing I did was pay off all my debts, the rent I'd missed, the hospital bills from when Eli was born, and even the small loans I'd taken just to get by. Each payment felt like cutting off a heavy chain that had been tied around me for years. I kept it all private, moving slowly and quietly. I didn't want anyone to notice yet. Then, I found a small house on the edge of town. 2 bedrooms, a small yard, and sunlight pouring through the kitchen window in the mornings. It wasn't big or fancy, but it felt safe. When Eli ran across the empty living room laughing, I knew I had made the right choice. I bought secondhand furniture, painted the walls myself, and made it feel like home. After settling in, I started thinking about what came next. I didn't want to live off lottery money. I wanted to build something of my own, something that would last. For years, I'd loved cooking. Back at the diner, I used to dream about running my own place, but it always seemed impossible. Now it wasn't. I used part of the money to open a small catering business. I named it Eli's Table. It started with just me and one assistant, cooking for small events, birthday parties, office lunches, weddings. People loved the food, and soon the business started growing faster than I imagined. I worked hard, just like before, but now the work felt different. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about creating a life. I hired 2 more people, expanded the menu, and even got a small van with the business name on it. Every night, when I tucked Eli into bed, I felt proud. He would smile and say, "Mommy, your food makes people happy." Those words meant more to me than any amount of money ever could. Months passed, and the fear that had once ruled my life began to fade. I wasn't the girl who begged for love or approval anymore. I didn't need anyone's permission to be proud of who I was. I had built something from the same pain that almost broke me. Every morning, as I stood in my kitchen preparing food for a new event, I felt peace. Real peace. I finally understood what strength looked like. It wasn't loud or angry. It was quiet, steady, and completely mine. It had been almost 3 years since my life had turned around. The business was doing well, Eli was growing fast, and I finally felt like things were stable. I hadn't heard from my mother in all that time. Part of me believed I never would. But one quiet afternoon, as I was decorating cupcakes for a client, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, I froze. My mother was standing there, holding a bouquet of flowers and wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Lena," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You look so beautiful. I've missed you so much." For a second, I couldn't speak. Memories rushed back, her shouting, the cold porch, the door slamming in my face. And now she was standing here, acting as if none of that ever happened. I stepped aside slowly, not because I wanted to let her in, but because Eli was standing behind me, watching curiously. She looked past me and gasped. "Is that my grandson?" she asked, pressing her hand to her chest like she was about to cry. "Oh, he's precious. Can I hold him?" I hesitated. The woman who had called me trash, when I was scared and pregnant, now wanted to play the loving grandmother. I looked at her face and saw not guilt, but calculation, the kind of smile she used when she wanted something. I took a deep breath. "Come in," I said quietly. I wasn't ready for a scene in front of Eli. She walked in, looking around the house like she was taking inventory. "You've done well for yourself," she said, her eyes scanning the clean walls, the new furniture, the little toys on the floor. I simply nodded. I could feel her studying me, maybe realizing that I wasn't the weak girl she once threw out. "I've been thinking about you a lot," she continued. "I regret what happened. I wasn't myself back then." Her voice trembled just enough to sound rehearsed. I stayed quiet. Inside, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. She hadn't even apologized properly. She was just rewriting the story to make herself look better. She reached across the table, touching my hand gently. "Lena, we're still family. I'd love to be part of your life again, and Eli's too." I pulled my hand away slowly and gave a small smile that didn't reveal anything. "It's been a long time, Mom," I said softly. "People change." She nodded quickly, taking my calm tone as a sign of forgiveness. But deep inside, I wasn't ready to forgive. I wasn't even sure I wanted to. When she left later that day, promising to visit again soon, I stood by the window watching her walk away. I knew this wasn't about love or family. She had heard about my success. That was why she came back. But I decided to wait, to listen, to watch. Because this time, I wasn't the one who would be blindsided. A few days later, my mother came by again, just like she promised. This time, she brought a homemade pie, acting as if we were the closest family in the world. I could tell she was trying too hard. Her voice was overly sweet, her smile too wide. Still, I invited her in, just to see what she was really after. I made her a cup of coffee and sat across from her at the kitchen table. She looked around the house again, her eyes lingering on the framed photos of Eli and the new kitchen appliances. "You've really done well for yourself," she said, stirring her coffee slowly. "It makes me proud to see how far you've come." I just nodded, keeping my face calm. She started talking about forgiveness, about how families should always find their way back to each other. Her words were smooth and careful, the kind you practice before saying out loud. "We all make mistakes, Lena," she said softly. "I wasn't the best mother. But I've changed. I want to make things right." I watched her closely as she spoke. It was strange to hear her say those things, but even stranger that her eyes didn't match her words. They looked worried, not warm. Then, after a long pause, she sighed. "I've been having a hard time lately," she said, setting her cup down. "The bills are piling up. It's just been so difficult on my own." She looked at me, waiting for a reaction. There it was, the real reason she came back. It wasn't about love or regret. It was about money. The moment she heard I was doing well, she remembered she had a daughter. I leaned back in my chair and smiled faintly. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mom," I said softly. She gave me a hopeful look, her lips curling into a small smile, ready to accept help that I hadn't offered yet. I let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking again. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll help you, the same way you helped me when I was homeless." Her face froze. The smile vanished, and her hands stopped moving. For a second, she just stared at me, as if she didn't understand. Then her eyes lowered and she whispered, "Lena, that's not fair." I stayed calm. "No, it's fair," I said quietly. "You told me to live with my choices. Now you can live with yours." The room went silent except for the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. She didn't know what to say. She looked down, pretending to fix her sleeve, but I could see the embarrassment and anger in her face. After a moment, she stood up and said she should go. I walked her to the door, and as she stepped outside, I said gently, "Take care, Mom." She didn't look back. When the door closed, I let out a long breath. My hands were shaking, not from guilt, but from release. I hadn't yelled or cried. I didn't need to. The silence between us had said everything. A few days after our last conversation, my mother called again. Her voice sounded softer than before, almost nervous. She said she wanted to see me one last time, that there were things she needed to say. I could tell she was trying to find another way to reach me. Part of me didn't want to see her again, but another part wanted to finish what she had started. I agreed to meet her at my house the next afternoon. When she arrived, she was wearing her best coat, her hair done neatly, just like always. She smiled as if everything was fine, pretending we had never argued. "I just wanted us to have a real talk," she said. "I don't like how we left things last time." I nodded and motioned for her to sit down. She started talking again about how hard life had been, how lonely she was, and how she wished we could be close like before. I listened quietly, letting her words fill the room, but my heart stayed still. I had already prepared something for her. When she finished talking, I got up and walked to the cabinet by the wall. I took out a small envelope I had sealed the night before. I walked back and placed it gently in front of her. "Before we talk about anything else," I said, "I want you to open this." She looked confused but curious. Slowly, she tore it open. Inside was a single photograph, a picture of me years ago, sitting in an old car, holding baby Eli wrapped in a thin blanket. You could see exhaustion all over my face. That picture was taken by a kind woman who had found me crying in the parking lot the night my mother threw me out. My mother stared at the photo for a long time, her hands trembling slightly. Then she looked up at me. I could see her trying to find words, but none came out. I waited a moment before speaking. "That was the night you told me I wasn't your daughter anymore," I said quietly. "The night you locked the door behind me." Beneath the photo, there was a small note I had written. It read, You didn't want a daughter then. Don't pretend you do now. She read it slowly, and I saw the color drain from her face. Lena, she whispered, her voice breaking. I was angry. I didn't know what I was doing. I made mistakes, but I stopped her before she could finish. No, Mom. You made choices, I said firmly. And now I'm making mine. She looked down again, clutching the photo like it could erase the past. But it couldn't. That image was the truth she'd buried for years, the proof of what her pride had cost. For once, she didn't argue or defend herself. She just sat there in silence. I stood up, ready to end it. You taught me to live with my choices, I said quietly. I'm just doing the same. She nodded weakly, tears filling her eyes, and walked out of my house without another word. That night, after my mother left, I sat alone in the quiet house. Eli was asleep in his room, and the sound of his soft breathing through the baby monitor was the only thing that comforted me. I looked around the living room, the home I had built with my own hands, the business contracts stacked neatly on the table, the framed photo of Eli smiling. Everything around me was proof that I had survived. At first, I didn't know what I was feeling. My chest was tight, and my eyes burned with tears I didn't expect. But these weren't the same tears I used to cry years ago. They weren't from hurt or anger. They came from something else, release. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of my mother's words or her rejection. It was like all the pain I had carried finally melted away. For years, I had wished she would say she was sorry. I thought maybe if she did, I would finally feel whole again. But sitting there that night, I realized I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her to understand what she had done. I had already healed in my own way, not because she changed, but because I did. I walked quietly to Eli's room and stood by his bed. He was sleeping peacefully, his little hand resting on his cheek. I brushed a strand of hair off his forehead and whispered, "You're my everything." Looking at him, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. I had a son who loved me unconditionally, something I never truly had growing up. His laughter filled spaces that once held silence. His love taught me what family really meant. I thought about the business I had built from nothing, the long nights, the early mornings, and the determination that kept me going. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could rise without anyone's help. Every meal I cooked, every event I catered, carried a piece of my story. It wasn't just food. It was strength served on a plate. As I sat back down, I realized that revenge wasn't always about hurting the people who hurt you. Sometimes, it was about living so well that their actions no longer had power over you. My mother's cruelty had once defined me, but not anymore. I had turned that pain into purpose. I had found peace where she had left destruction. That night, I let myself cry freely, not because I was broken, but because I was finally free. Every tear that fell felt like it was washing away the last bit of bitterness I'd carried. I whispered softly, "I forgive you, but I'll never need you again." Then I turned off the light, crawled into bed, and for the first time in years, Years later, life looked completely different for me and Eli. We lived in a small, peaceful house by the lake. The mornings there were calm and quiet, the kind that made you feel safe. Every day, I would sit by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise spread its golden light across the water. It was my favorite time of day, the moment I reminded myself how far I'd come. Eli was growing fast. He was a kind and bright boy who loved fishing and drawing by the lake. Sometimes, he would run to me with his sketches, excited to show me a new one. His laughter filled the house, making it feel warm and alive. Watching him live so freely made me realize something important. I had given him the life I once wished for myself. A home filled with love, safety, and peace. I had stopped thinking about my mother long ago, but sometimes her memory would pass through my mind, like a faint shadow. I heard she still lived in the same old house alone. People said she was bitter and quiet now, spending most days by herself. I didn't feel angry anymore when I thought of her. The pain she caused had already lost its power. I had no reason to hate her. Hate would only keep me tied to the past I worked so hard to escape. One evening, while walking by the lake with Eli, he asked me, "Mom, do you ever miss Grandma?" I looked at the sunset reflecting on the water and said softly, "I used to. But now I just hope she's at peace." He nodded, not asking more, and held my hand. That simple moment reminded me how healing works. Not by forgetting what happened, but by accepting it and moving forward. I had built a new life, one made from love, hard work, and forgiveness. The woman I used to be, The one who cried in that car with a baby in her arms was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who no longer needed anyone's approval. My journey taught me that strength doesn't always come from fighting back. Sometimes it comes from walking away and choosing peace. Every morning, I still whispered the same promise to myself as the sun rose. I'll never let anyone break me again. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about remembering my worth. I had learned that the best kind of revenge wasn't wealth, success, or even recognition. It was peace, the quiet kind that no one can take from you. As I sat by the lake one morning, watching Eli skip stones across the water, I smiled to myself. I finally understood that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I was enough all along. And in that moment, I realized this was what true freedom felt like. Slept without dreams of the past. Peace had finally found me.